There you are. Come and sit by the fire. It burns quietly tonight, steady and warm, as if it has been waiting without keeping count. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow without needing to be guided. You don't need to follow this story closely. This forest does not ask for attention. It listens, even when your thoughts drift somewhere gentler. Tonight, I want to tell you about something that rested beneath the roots of Whispergrove. Not lost, not trapped, just bearing weight longer than it should have. This is a story about listening to the ground beneath your feet, about choosing patience instead of searching, and about how some paths are not found by moving forward, but by staying still long enough to be noticed. I have lived in Whispergrove long enough to learn that the forest does not hide its treasures out of malice. It hides them because some things are not meant to be found until they are truly needed. That morning I set out with a clear purpose. I was searching for a seed, not an ordinary one, not something that could be planted and forgotten. The kind of seed I was looking for does not grow in soil alone, and it does not answer to water or sunlight the way most things do. It forms only where the forest has been still for a very long time, so still that even stone begins to remember what it was before it hardened. The old names call it the stone-bound seed. It is small, no larger than a smooth pebble, and easy to overlook if you do not know what you are seeing. It carries no glow, no markings, nothing that would draw attention to itself. But when held, it is warm in a way that does not fade, as if it remembers the pressure of the earth that shaped it. Such seeds are rare, not because the forest cannot make them, but because the conditions they require have become uncommon. They need long rest, deep balance, a place where nothing has tried to change the land for generations. Whispergrove still holds a few places like that, if one knows how to look. I had not come expecting certainty. Searches like this are never direct. You walk, you listen, and you allow the forest to guide you toward or away from what you seek. If the time is wrong, the path simply grows quiet. This time, the forest did not turn me away. The air that morning settled gently between the trees, clear and calm, as though everything had already agreed to remain where it was. Leaves spoke only when stirred by purpose. My staff pressed into the ground with a familiar softness, and the earth received each step without resistance. I followed signs I had learned to trust over many years, the way moss gathered thicker along stone-heavy ground, the faint warmth that lingers where pressure has rested for centuries, the subtle change in sound when roots grow around something older than themselves. For a while, everything felt right. Then the ground beneath my feet responded. Not sharply, not enough to alarm me, just enough to be noticed. It softened, then steadied again, as if adjusting to my weight rather than yielding beneath it. I slowed my pace, allowing the moment to unfold without interference. That was when I saw the animal. It stood a short distance away, near the roots of a beech tree, whose bark had darkened with age and moisture. At first glance, it looked much like a badger, sturdy and low to the ground, its body built for patience rather than speed. But as I watched, small details began to surface. Its fur was threaded with moss, not tangled or clinging, but grown in as though it belonged there. Pale green strands followed the curve of its shoulders and spine, softening its shape. A cluster of tiny mushrooms had taken root along one side of its back, their caps faintly luminous, glowing with a gentle light that pulsed almost too slowly to notice. Near its left ear, a single flower bloomed, small, star-shaped, and softly radiant, opening and closing as though it were breathing. The animal did not flee. It did not stiffen or bare its teeth. It simply stood where it was, head lowered slightly, its attention focused not on me, but on the ground beneath its paws. I remained still. In Whispergrove, animals do not linger without reason. When something unsettles the forest, they are the first to notice. They do not rush to escape. They pause. They listen. And if the imbalance persists, they stay where it can be felt most clearly. The ground beneath my feet shifted again. This time there was no mistaking it. The moss rose, no more than the thickness of a finger, then slowly settled back into place. The movement was steady, deliberate, and carried a weight to it that soil alone does not possess. I felt it through the soles of my boots, through the staff resting in my hand. The animal adjusted its stance at the same moment, stepping aside as the ground lifted, then returning its weight once the movement passed. It was not reacting. It was moving with it. I took a careful step forward. The earth responded once more, not in resistance, but in accommodation. A shallow depression formed beneath my foot and eased again as I shifted my weight away. Nearby, a thin line of water pooled between stones trembled, its surface disturbed, though the air remained perfectly still. I lowered myself to one knee and pressed my palm against the moss. Warmth greeted me immediately. Not the warmth of sunlight or decay, but something deeper, slower. It rose and fell beneath my hand, faint but undeniable, like the measured breath of something resting just below the threshold of waking. I withdrew my hand and sat back, letting the sensation linger. This was not the place I had expected to find. The signs that had led me toward the stone-bound seed still pointed onward. Stone lay close to the surface here, yes, but the balance was wrong. Too much movement, too much effort beneath the stillness. Places where the seed forms are quiet in a different way. They do not adjust. They do not answer. And yet, I could not ignore what lay beneath me. The animal lifted its head then and looked at me fully. Its eyes were dark and reflective, calm rather than curious. There was no request in its gaze, no fear, only presence. It held my attention for a long moment, then lowered itself to the ground, resting its body against the moss. As it did, the earth shifted again, slightly deeper this time, as though responding to the added weight. I exhaled slowly. Whatever rested beneath this place was not disturbed by us. It was strained. I rose to my feet and moved carefully around the animal, watching how the ground responded. The movement was uneven. One side of the clearing rose more than the other, and when it settled, the earth did not return fully to its original shape. The trees nearby leaned at a barely perceptible angle, their roots drawn tight on one side and slack on the other. This was not random motion. It was an attempt. Something vast lay beneath the forest here, carrying soil and stone upon its back, and it was trying, slowly, patiently, to change its position. I had heard old stories when I was younger. Not tales meant to frighten children, but the quiet kind told by those who had spent too long listening to the land. Stories of stone-bound beings older than the trees, whose rest shaped the valleys, and whose movement, rare as it was, altered the course of forests. I had never expected to stand upon one. The realization did not arrive as a sudden thought, but as a gradual alignment of understanding, the warmth, the rhythm, the way the forest leaned and adjusted. This was not earth responding to pressure, it was pressure responding to earth. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, slow and deliberate, placing my staff down ahead of me to test the ground before each step. In some places the soil was firm and unyielding. In others it softened and shifted, as if stretched too long in one direction. The animal rose and followed my movement, keeping a respectful distance. It stopped where the ground rose highest and sat again, its body settling into a shallow hollow that seemed to fit it perfectly. I understood then that it had chosen this place deliberately, not to hide and not to rest, but to mark where the imbalance was greatest. I could have turned back at that moment. The stone-bound seed was still somewhere ahead of me, deeper into the forest where the stone lay undisturbed and the ground held its silence. I knew how to read those signs, and I knew that stopping here would cost me time, perhaps the opportunity itself. But Whispergrove does not reward those who take without regard. I had learned that lesson long ago. I returned to the center of the clearing and sat, placing my staff across my knees. The ground breathed beneath me again, slower now, as if aware of being observed. I matched my breathing to its rhythm and waited. Minutes passed, perhaps more. Time behaves differently when you listen closely. With each rise and fall, the pattern became clearer. The movement was not vertical alone. There was a subtle twist to it, a pull toward the east that never quite completed itself. Something beneath the forest was attempting to turn, but the weight above it resisted. Stone does not complain when burdened. It simply endures. I pressed my palm to the ground once more and spoke softly, not expecting an answer. "I know," I said. "There's no need to hurry." The earth did not still, but the rhythm eased. The animal shifted its weight and lowered its head, as though satisfied. I sat there for a long while longer, feeling the slow persistence beneath me. The stone-bound seed remained on my mind, but it no longer felt distant. Instead, it felt connected to this place in a way I had not anticipated. Seeds like that do not form without cause. They require pressure, time, endurance, and sometimes they require mercy. I remained with the clearing as the light shifted and shadows lengthened, listening to the quiet labor beneath the forest floor. Somewhere deep below, stone and moss bore the weight of centuries, waiting for the moment when it might finally be allowed to move. And I understood, with a certainty that settled gently rather than sharply, that before I could take anything from Whispergrove that day, I would first need to help it turn. I did not begin by acting. That has never been the way with things that have rested longer than memory. When something carries the weight of a forest upon its back, the smallest hurry becomes an insult. Instead, I stayed where I was and listened until the rhythm beneath me no longer felt strained, but simply present. The ground continued to breathe, slowly, deeply, always favoring one side. I stood and walked again along the clearing's edge, this time not to observe, but to understand where the burden pressed most heavily. I placed my staff ahead of me before each step, letting the earth speak first. Where the ground resisted, I moved on. Where it yielded too easily, I paused. The animal followed at a distance. It did not circle me. It did not hurry. It simply repositioned itself whenever the rhythm shifted, settling again where the strain gathered most clearly. Each time it did, the earth responded with a deeper, slower rise, as though acknowledging the adjustment. That was when I understood what the stone-bound one beneath us needed. Not force, not release, space. Stone does not wake as flesh does. It does not stretch or rise suddenly. It repositions itself by degrees so small they are often mistaken for stillness. The being beneath Whispergrove had not been trying to stand. It had been trying to turn, only enough to relieve the pressure that had grown uneven over centuries of growth. The forest above it had become too heavy on one side. I began by lightening what I could. I moved fallen branches first, not removing them entirely, but shifting them away from the areas where the ground dipped lowest. Dead wood holds weight differently than living roots. When it presses too long in one place, it forgets how to yield. As I worked, I matched my movements to the rhythm beneath me. I waited through each rise of the ground and acted only as it settled. When the earth lifted, I rested. When it fell, I moved. The animal watched closely. At times it stepped forward and pressed its weight into the moss, then retreated again, as though testing the response. Each time it did, I adjusted my work, redistributing what little weight I could without breaking the forest's surface. I did not cut living roots. That is a language the forest never forgets and never forgives. Instead, I loosened those that had already torn themselves free in small ways, easing them back into gentler positions where they no longer pulled against the movement beneath. The ground breathed again, deeper this time, slower. A faint warmth spread outward from the center of the clearing, carrying with it the scent of stone after rain and moss, long undisturbed. The air itself seemed to settle lower, as if drawn toward the place where pressure was finally beginning to shift. I knelt and pressed both palms to the earth. The warmth was stronger now, not urgent, not strained, patient. I closed my eyes and spoke again, quietly, without expectation. "There's time," I said. "You don't have to carry it all at once." The forest did not answer. But the rhythm beneath my hands changed. The next movement was not upward. It was sideways. The ground did not lift so much as ease itself in a long, gradual pull, like a breath released after being held too carefully. Trees leaned a fraction more, then steadied. Moss stretched and settled into new lines, forming soft ridges where none had been before. The animal stepped back, not in fear, in respect. I stood slowly and moved away from the center of the clearing, giving the place room. The earth continued its adjustment, not as a single motion, but as a series of small corrections, each one bringing the weight above it closer to balance. Then, at last, the stone-bound one beneath Whispergrove turned. Not fully, only enough. There was no sound of breaking earth, no cracking roots, no sudden upheaval. Just a long, quiet shift, like a continent remembering its place. The warmth beneath my feet spread outward and then faded to a steady presence, no longer pulsing with effort. When the ground stilled, I felt it immediately. The breathing did not stop, it evened. I returned to the place where the animal had first settled. The moss there had parted slightly during the movement, revealing a shallow depression I had not seen before. It was not bare earth, nor exposed stone, but something in between, compressed layers of moss and mineral shaped by time and pressure rather than growth. And there, resting where the stone-bound one had shielded it for longer than I could guess, was what I had come seeking. The stone-bound seed. It was smaller than I remembered, no larger than a smooth river pebble, its surface matte and unremarkable. No glow marked it, no warmth radiated outward, and yet when I held my hand above it, I felt a quiet resistance, as though the space around it had learned to hold still. I did not touch it immediately. Some things must be acknowledged before they are taken. I placed my palm against the moss beside it and waited. The ground did not pull away. The warmth remained. That was enough. I lifted the seed carefully, cradling it rather than gripping it. It was heavier than it looked, dense with the kind of weight that does not belong to mass alone. When I closed my fingers around it, A gentle warmth settled into my hand and stayed there. Not a gift, a permission. The animal rose then and approached the place where the seed had rested. It sniffed the moss, then turned away without hesitation, padding calmly toward the trees. It did not look back. Its task was finished. I replaced the moss as best I could, smoothing it gently over the hollow so that the forest would remember how to rest there. The ground beneath my hands felt settled now, no longer adjusting, no longer straining. Before I left, I rested my staff upright in the center of the clearing and placed my hand upon it. "Thank you," I said, not to the seed, nor to the forest alone, but to the deep patience beneath it all. The warmth lingered for a moment longer, then faded into quiet. I turned and began the walk home. The path felt different beneath my feet, not changed, but aware. The forest had shifted just enough to remember itself anew. Leaves stirred softly as I passed, and the air held a calm that felt earned rather than assumed. When I reached the edge of Whispergrove, I paused and looked back once. The clearing was already closing in on itself. Moss reclaimed its lines. Roots settled into their new paths. To any who passed later, it would appear unchanged, as it should. That night I placed the stone-bound seed near my hearth, not to plant it, but to let it rest a while longer. Some things need to remember the weight they have carried before they are ready to grow. The fire burned low and steady. The shadows returned to their familiar places, and beneath it all, the forest breathed, slow, even, and at peace. Some things are not found by searching harder. They are found when we choose to stop and listen. And sometimes what the forest gives us is not something new, but something it has been holding for a very long time, waiting for the moment when both it and we are finally ready to let go. And so the forest settled once more. The roots lay quietly beneath the soil. The fireflies returned to their slow wandering, and the ground released the breath it had been holding. That is the way of Whispergrove. Nothing is hurried, nothing is forced. What needs to rise will rise in its own time. What needs to rest will be allowed to do so. If your thoughts feel heavy, you may leave them here for a while. The forest does not mind. It knows how to hold things gently. Stay by the fire as long as you wish, or drift into sleep knowing that beneath every path there is a deeper place that remembers you. Good night, my friend.